You are listening to the Think Brick Australia podcast. Think Brick Australia represents the clay, brick and paver manufacturers of Australia. Brick by brick, our podcast will discuss technical information and architectural case studies with special guests. I'm your host, Elizabeth McIntyre, the CEO of Think Brick Australia. On today's podcast, we are welcoming one of our oldest supporters, and not by age, I mean by tenure, of how much he has been loving bricks for all these years and providing such a pathway not only for students but also for the rest of the architectural community to see how they have showcased brick in all of their applications. I'd like you to welcome Stephen Neille from Neeson Murcutt Neille Architects. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
I mentioned in the introduction, you actually won one of the first Think Brick Awards, which was the About Face Award for your work when you were with Pendal and Neille. And we will go back and revisit that. Sure. But I wonder, before we do, whether you can just talk a little bit about your childhood and what growing up was like for you.
So I grew up in Perth, enjoying living Scarborough Beach beside the ocean. Dad was a pilot, so a lot of travelling. Really enjoyed the family in that place. Mother's Italian background, so big family and a lot of time spent with family and friends.
And how big was your family?
Myself, brother and a sister.
And when did you know, like as a child, were you interested in building things or art? How did you know architecture was going to be?
I was always making things. I love making models, model aircraft. I drew yachts all the time when I was meant to be concentrating in class, but I love boats, love sailing, love drawing and love making things. Took my bike apart all the time and put it back together. And I think Dad was a bit worried. Apparently he gave me a train set when I was about 3 or 4. He spent all night assembling it on a board and he gave it to me for Christmas. He had to go flying, came back. I'd neatly unscrewed every piece and put it back in its box.
It would have been devastating.
Yeah, it was.
We've all done that as parents, assembling these things. And when you say that there was a lot of travel, did you get to travel with your father?
I did. I used to travel in the jump seat in those days. So I was able to sit up the front of the aircraft and travel northwest Australia and mainly in Western Australia because that's where Dad was flying.
Okay, so he was flying up to the...
Yeah, and then we spent a year in Malaysia in Kuching.
Oh, wow.
In Sarawak, Borneo, which was wonderful. Had a pet orangutan and they had to then give that on to the zoo. His name's Bullet. He was still there a while ago.
Oh, wow. And how old were you when that happened?
Grade 4, so 10.
Okay.
10 years old. Yeah. Quite transformative, actually. No TV there, so a lot of reading, a lot of experiencing in the jungle, a lot of swimming.
Was there a fair bit of freedom while you were there? And with the travelling around Australia, did that change the way you saw things? Because, I mean, not many people would have had that opportunity.
Yes, profoundly connected to seeing the earth from the sky. So those pictures of landscape and geometry of roads, geometry of towns, that has quite a profound sense of the country, the sense of place for me, and aligns quite nicely with Indigenous. Yeah. Clearly they were constructing that from their minds, which is just so powerful. But to see that, I'd still always take a window seat and look down and enjoy that.
What stage in your senior school have you chosen architecture? Or
I wanted to be a naval architect, actually. Okay. So the drawing of boats. At that time, though, you either had to become a boat builder, which I did. I left school and got an apprenticeship as a boat builder in Fremantle. I was treated so badly, as in I swept the floor, I think, for about 5 or 6 weeks. And I was interested in seeing some plans or drawings and I'd ask questions and they just had no interest in. So I quit, went back to school and decided architecture was the way to go.
So you went back to school and then who suggested architecture, or did you just come up with that?
No, I think, you do. I thought naval architecture and cross off the naval, you get the architecture. I was basically there. I loved building. I worked for my uncle who's a structural engineer. And he always had jobs during the holidays. I worked for him. Another uncle was a bricklayer. I worked for him a lot. I loved being on site. So really,
where did you study?
I always had that connection.
Yeah. And where did you study?
So first year I studied at WAIT, it was called then, Australian Institute of Technology.
Okay.
Under Bill Busfield and Jeff Warren, which was just the most transformative, enjoyable year. When we did those studios with Bill and Jeff, I thought I found my home. This is it. And then at the end of first year, I did very well. I really enjoyed it. At the end of first year, went into second year. Second year, another studio teacher said, well, forget everything you learned last year. We're going to deal with the reality of making projects, and looked at project homes and so on. And I actually quit.
Oh,
walked
wow.
out the door. As I'm walking out the door, there's a sign on the notice board, student required. So I took the sign down, called the architect. It happened to be John Andrews International. They were doing the Merlin Hotel in Perth. I rang, got the job. I didn't know who John Andrews was at that time, but so did that for a year. And then when that job finished, they said, would you like to come and work for us in Sydney? So I was 19. I said, I do. And landed on my feet. Arrived, lived in North Sydney with a friend's mother for a little while, and then travelling up to Palm Beach because John's office was in a boat shed on Pittwater.
Oh, wow.
And then worked there for a couple of years, living in Whale Beach. One of their younger partners was going to Adelaide
Nice.
to do a job down there, and said, would you like to look after my house? And I did. So that was my introduction to Sydney, living in Whale Beach and
That's
working
a pretty
at Palm
good
Beach.
introduction.
It was. And I love working with John. It was a magnificent office, really good people coming through there. He had a really strong connection with Harvard University. Graduates were always coming through the place, great partners. I just enjoyed it. John had called me up on Friday afternoon because I was the young student in the office.
Yeah.
Show us your work. I'm like, oh, my God. So he'd critique me, and Joel Jackson had come up from Melbourne, and I think it was just a lot of fun for him. Anyway, end of that happened. John said, look, Stephen, I think you should go. I was going to New South Wales Institute of Technology then.
Yes. Okay.
I finished the first degree, and John said, why do you think about Sydney University? And I said, need to keep working. He said, well, don't think about it too long because I've already applied, rung them and said,
oh, wow.
you're going to apply. So I did and got in. That's where I met Rachel and Nick and Dave Austin, a lot of very good people, actually.
So how long had it been since you first started? Because, all of the Perth architects we speak to talk about Jeff and Bill. They're legendary. And so how long had that been just on a timeline?
1982 was
when
my
you
first year there.
Yep.
And actually, when the 1990 recession hit, I was working for Romeldo Jurgler or Mitchell Jurgler and Thorpe, as they were at the time. Recession hit. They weren't going to get rid of everyone. Everyone had to take a 30% pay cut or something like that. It was a terrible recession.
It was.
My son had just been born at Manly Hospital.
Oh.
We didn't have any family here. We thought, can we survive this? Jeff Warren rang and said, there's a job going at Curtin University teaching, running a studio. Would you be interested? I said, I would. So
yep.
That's when I headed back to WA.
Right.
Ran first year studio, became head of department, employed people like Simon Pendal.
Okay.
Taught Kieran Wong, Emma Williamson, a lot of very, very good people. Met Adrian at that time, Martin Hook at that time, Finn, Raman Jerome, who actually supervised his thesis. And then at the end of it, I said, you need to go to Sydney and work. There's not enough good work going here at the moment. So I sent him to go and have a look at Mitchell, Jurgler and Thorpe. And I think he worked for them for a while. What
did you find the difference? Obviously, you've had that sort of little bit of hindsight between obviously Western Australia and Sydney.
Yep.
Was there a difference in how they approached architecture?
Yep, there's a very, very strong difference.
Talk me through that.
Western Australia comes from a mining mindset.
Yep.
It just does. And architecture is almost seen as something on top of the building, something sort of additional. Okay. I find in Sydney it's absolutely integrated. People want architecture. People want what it delivers. People enjoy the beauty. It's an absolute value add. So they're very different. When I went back to Perth, I used to go to the Donaldson or Morn Christmas party every year.
Yep.
Jeff and I would have our annual argument about, Jeff would be saying, it's so hard to practice architecture. I said, Jeff, you got to be positive. You got to make it work. And at the end of the night,
Jeff Warren was saying
Jeff
that.
Warren, yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
He said, it's hard here. And I said, yeah, I know, but we've got to change it. We can make it. At the end of the night, we'd agree to disagree. And anyway, I got married here 5 years ago, and Jeff was at the wedding. Called Jeff in. I'd been practicing a little while here. Then I said, Jeff, you know that argument we had? You were right. It's hard to practice in Perth. So I admire anyone that's doing really good work there.
Yeah.
Not that the talent isn't there. It's absolutely there. Wonderful schools of architecture, wonderful people.
Yeah.
There's not a culture of wanting and desiring and seeing the value of architecture across the board.
I think, though, it does stem from, as you've mentioned, just the single-mindedness of it being mining.
An engineering place,
yeah.
And powerfully so.
And haven't we got some great, everyone from Perth coming east, so we love it. Yeah. And so talk to me about, you obviously met Simon Pendal at university. And so when did you decide to go out together?
So Simon was a wonderful student. He did great work. He went to London after graduating. We stayed in contact. When he came back, I invited him to come teach with me. Became a great teacher, and he continues to be such. We really enjoyed each other's work and each other's company. We just thought, let's do something together. So a competition came up. I think it was the Eco Village in the northwest. We did the competition. We loved the entry, and we didn't win, but we really loved the work. So we just thought, let's establish a practice and teach and work, which really enjoyed.
How long did you do that for?
We started the practice, I think, just as I finished my PhD, which was 2007. Then came to Sydney in 2015. Simon and I wanted to continue the practice when I came over here. When we tried, it was just such an intimate practice. Literally, there was the two of us, maybe with a student from time to time. There was so much dialogue and contact. We just couldn't, it just wasn't working across.
It's hard with the time difference too. Yeah.
It was. Rachel was running her practice. I was looking at that. I was teaching. And we did our own house. We just thought that process of designing that was such a wonderful experience. We should just keep going there.
Keep going.
So,
and what were some of the projects? I mean, I've got a few of the brick ones here, but with yourself and Simon that you look back fondly on.
Every project was an absolute joy of discussion and drawing and making and discussing. The Think Brick competition was a highlight.
Yeah,
it was an opportunity to put so many small experiments into one new project. We ended up being equal winners on that with M3, and we loved the process and loved the project and learnt so much about it. So.
And I mean, you've been, and that was back in 2008, before my time, but that was when we used to have the About Face competition, which was a conceptual competition, obviously to encourage architects to design in brick, although you would say that in Western Australia, it did come naturally.
It was like a no-brainer,
Yeah.
I mean, the likes of Brian Klopper, making some of, I think, Australia's best brick project using recycled brick at that time. Genius.
It's pretty visionary.
He was well read. He knew how to make buildings. He worked on the site. In fact, I invited him to come and teach with me when I was running fifth year studio. I just thought students need some of this. And he did. He worked with us. Quite a figure. He passed away.
He only passed away. So I think it was during COVID, I believe. Yes.
Terrible loss.
Yeah. Everyone knows about Brian over there. So you've now come back to Sydney and with Rachel, and you start, as you mentioned, the first project was your own house, which was the Hole in the Roof house. Tell us a little bit about what you were trying to achieve.
We purchased a beautiful block of land with an existing house on it at the head of Bronte Gully. It was such a beautiful site. I surfed close to the ocean. However, it was on a busy road, the triangular site, so you only had one neighbour. Beautiful expansive views to the east across Bronte Gully. We wanted all the joy that gave, clearly without the noise. We wanted to create a sanctuary of some description away from the noise. So we cut a hole in the northwest corner of the house because the house being built over that entire component. Cut a hole in the house, literally a hole in the roof.
A tiled roof, I must add.
Yeah, brick and tile house. In order to make that sort of solitude, and then the space that we lost from that space we built sort of on the busy side, and it worked beautifully. It became a sanctuary and a quiet, sun-filled place.
And Stephen, you've had a lot of time teaching, and I just wondered whether you'd noticed any sort of trends or changes throughout that time looking with...
Trend is that students are always vibrant and wonderful and keen and want to do great things. Changes have come from the universities wanting to be more research focused.
Yep.
And by research, that means typically specialization. But on the other side, architecture is actually, you need to be a really good generalist. You need to know a bit about a lot of things in order to put that together. So I think there is a little bit of a loss of the bigger picture of architecture. And you've got to have research. I did a PhD. I understand you need research to take things on. But as Van Schaik, my supervisor for the PhD, argued very well that research happens through the process of designing and making, and you just need to articulate that and put that forward. So I think that's been a big shift. When I first joined Curtin University, they said, okay, good architect, you can do the work and take studio, but if you want any career in this place, you need to get a PhD. At that time, you had to do a written PhD. I had no interest in doing a written PhD, and they said, well, you'll never have a future. I said, well, anyway, Leon invented the PhD by project. So when that came,
yes,
in fact, I was offered a scholarship for that with Richard Black, Janie Lawrence. It was a group of 7 called Ephemeral Architectures, and that was the first lot of 7 to experiment with this idea of could you do a PhD by project.
And so what was your PhD?
It was called Speed Space, Architecture, Landscape and Perception. Considering what it is to experience architecture, how you mentally process that, and then how it comes back out through the design process, and I had to model that. So fundamentally, when you experience architecture, you experience in a necessarily linear manner because we're embodied, so you have to run through the project or whatever. You experience things one after the other in a sequence. However, that's not necessarily the way you remember the architecture. You might remember the main living room or some space has a big memory bubble in your mind. Other places are smaller. So the argument was that architecture is remembered in that way, so perhaps it can also be designed in that way, thought about in that way. So I made a linear model that could then be folded up into a perception bundle.
Oh, wow.
And then you can unravel it again, and then you can fold it up again. So it's like unraveling, unfolding into the world, experiencing the world, and then folding it back into a perceptual bubble in your mind, and
then what
learning to pull out of that.
Yeah. And what did you learn for yourself out of that? Like, what was your biggest takeout?
That atmosphere matters, that the experience of a room at a particular time can hold incredible memories, and that you can piece together lots of those memories from lots of cities, from lots of places and lots of buildings, and you can start to construct those as a new architecture. That's remembering all of those parts, not one that looks like this one or that one, but taking parts from all of those and binding them into being, binding a new way of thinking.
So are you referring there to, and this is just when you say that, I think, is that the people that are in the room, or as well as the time of day or the room, or both?
It's the proportion of the room.
Okay.
It's the sense of light in the room. It's the acoustic signature of the room. It's the things that you touch in the room. The way that it's all been bound together builds an atmosphere, and it holds.
It does.
It holds in the memory, and everyone has those experiences. And often when we talk to clients, that's what we ask them to recall, rather than what does it look like? What are those things that you've experienced that are most magical for you? Yeah. Try and remake some of those.
No, it's true. I think that's a lot of when you talk about making your home, you're wanting to recreate some of those atmospheric feelings that you had, particularly when you were younger, I would imagine.
At any time. And I mean, Leon spoke about, spatial memory so fondly. Simon took that on in his PhD. I mean, so many architects, I think, have been influenced by Leon, and that manner of thinking about architecture as connected to spatial memory, and for architects to learn to draw from that to, of course you study the new masters, of course you study everything that's coming out. I mean, you understand the full depth of architecture, and you must do that, but don't underestimate your own experiences, either from childhood or from the day before. And
before we touch on the book, I did want to ask you, you've obviously, just in terms of your own artwork, you've been successful in that as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So, highly influenced at Sydney University by Le Corbusier. When studying not only his work but his life, recognising that he would paint in the morning and do architecture the rest of the day. And he was able to balance those two art forms. And I always was interested in art at Sydney University. I was part of the Tin Shed. You could take painting as an option.
Okay.
I took painting as an option every semester. Because I'd been to New South Wales Institute of Technology, I didn't have to take all of the construction subjects. So I would take fine art instead. Matthias Gerber was teaching at the time. By the end of my, I think, final year, Matthias turned to me and said, "Stephen, you should be an artist." I went, "Oh my God, I've just spent all of this time in architecture." So I always thought I could combine those two aspects. I've always drawn, inspired very much by Neil Durback, who taught me at Sydney University, who's always sketching and drawing. So that influence. So I've always, since 87, 86, kept a sketchbook. So I still have the entire sequence. Did my own painting and continued to paint, but that ability to work as an artist and an architect at the same time that Corb could do, I mean, he's genius. So I wasn't able to sustain that. It just, art took either too much headspace or architecture took too much headspace, and teaching at the same time. So the art dropped off. Then I think I saw an exhibition by Jurek Wybrenek. I was really impressed and fell in love with the work. I thought, I should go and work with this guy. So I did. I approached him and said, "Could we do some collaboration, architecture collaboration together? Would you be interested?" He was interested. So we formed an art practice called Surf.
Yes. Okay.
And we did competitions, as in public artworks, and were quite successful in that realm in Perth. So enjoyed that process immensely. Jurek's a wonderful artist, as is his wife Michelle. Actually, they're both.
So is it still going? Is Surf still going?
No, not really. We did one project here in Sydney, and I think Neeson Murcutt Neille's become so busy. Jurek's busy in his world. I think that thing of collaborating across the country is not easy. The practice exists.
Yes.
So if the opportunity comes up.
Does Surf stand for anything?
Well, beside the ocean, surf as in surfing, but we also quite like the old English sense of a serf as someone that was not a slave, but a worker, of someone working for others. Yeah. And we quite like that, that play.
All right. So, Stephen, I've got the book in front of me now, and as I said to you, I and Rachel, it's such a beautiful read. It's a lovely journey. Really, I guess, for the three sort of woven fabrics that come together. How did the book come to be?
Well, it was a direct invitation from Fleur Watson and Martin Hook at RMIT. They'd commenced this series on Australian architects. They thought they would have ongoing one a year across a sequence of years and practices from around the country. I just admire those guys so much for being confident in Australian architecture and publishing it and putting it out there. So Kirsten Thompson had done the first one. They approached us to do the second. We were totally delighted to be part of that. I think it is connected to an alumni. I'd studied at RMIT.
Yes.
Kirsten studied there. So it's connected to that as well, which is nice for them to teach so many or educate so many Australian architects, create postgraduate programs and then invite them back in.
But it's beautiful that it's documented.
Yeah, it is. It's really nice to document work, important to document work. It was a great process of editing projects. I mean, it was great for Rachel too, having worked with Nick on a body of work, and then Nick dying and Rachel having to work herself. So there's a body of work that she's done herself, and then enter Stephen and the third transformation. So we're able to sort of document those three bodies of work.
It's really
which was a wonderful binding, actually. actually.
Yeah, and it's just described beautifully. Yeah. And in the book, you talk a lot about tremoring. I wonder whether you could just articulate that for our listeners.
Well, it's a philosophical term actually about maybe connected to something like the sublime. It's that moment when you go into a room or you stand in front of something and you suspend thinking. You're really feeling, and your perceptual mechanisms are heightened, and it's almost like a tremoring. It's like something's happening here. I don't know what it is, but it's powerful and it's affecting my whole body, my whole psyche, and that's tremoring. So these moments of tremoring are not, you don't have them all the time, but it's to recognize that and to try and understand what's happening at that moment and what you're perceiving and what matters, I think is important.
So, and is that what you're asking your clients to do?
No.
Okay.
We're not asking them to do that. I think that's more in our realm and drawing on that. I suppose we are asking them to recall important. We would never tremoring.
No, but I mean, I know what you're saying, but in an indirect way, you are trying to experience.
Yeah, we are. Yeah,
what?
Yes, we are trying to draw on their important moments.
Yes.
Their important experiences, what matters to them. Yes, we are.
And the other sort of flavour of the book, which is no surprise, is just your involvement with the Indigenous and the cultural side of things. And you touched on it a little bit earlier. Just explain a little bit. You talk a lot about walking hand in hand. How does that play out in a project?
The book's title is Setting Architecture. The connection is the connection to landscape, the connection to place. So many wonderful architectural theorists, philosophers, architects discuss place, or Indigenous peoples have had such a close connection to place and to land, to country for so long. There's a shared, they're different experiences of place and country and landscape, and there's some overlaps, and not for one to become the other. But we worked with Bibi Baba on the project at Kamei. We'd come at it with eyes open, trying to understand the place from 2 points of view. We worked with Bibi. Both of us had to throw out preconceptions of unicultural direction, and we had to find a project together. And that's when walking hand in hand came.
Yeah.
It was powerful.
You can see, yeah. You can see that.
Didn't know it was that powerful, but it was. It was quite a moment. Quite a moment to actually try and find an architecture together, not reinforce known mechanisms, known ways of working. It did, and continues to be.
That's right. When you are walking together with Bibi, what were some of the aspects that changed the way you thought about things?
Cartesian order, which is something we're very familiar with, isn't a familiar natural order for Indigenous groups, and the necessary architecture that results from the orders that we work with through habit aren't the orders that Bibi was drawing from. The first project that we designed had a bark roof, which we'd drawn from the ways of making at Kamei at the time. It was an ephemeral thing. Fires could come through, could burn, and you could rebuild. You could learn from Indigenous weaving patterns and mechanisms of working with bark. They made canoes, so you could work with that to create shelter. We also had concrete buildings below that because important collections that needed to be protected. Bibi saw that and said, looks like a Polynesian. We're not Polynesian,
Yeah.
So it was, and it looked cathedral-like. So there were references from an Indigenous perspective that were very specific. And Kamei is ground zero. It's contested ground. It's an important place. It just felt like if people could walk hand in hand, you could find an Australia together.
Yes.
It'd be a great place. So that's what affected us. The potential of making a great place together.
And also it's fascinating that there's all of these sort of perceptions or ideals that both sides have that aren't meant to offend but sort of can, just because of the way we've all grown up.
And there's a lot to find. I just think Australia's going to become such a wonderful nation when we can work with one another, when we can let the truth be told and we can all own up to it and
embrace it.
And we can build a place together with a long, long history. Wonderful expertise coming from both sides, wonderful perceptions coming from both sides. I think there's a great future coming, but it'll take time and a lot of work.
I agree. Stephen, one of the things that you've used a lot in many of your works is brick. Why brick?
I just find it so versatile. You can make a floor, you can make a ceiling, you can make a wall. It's the scale of the hand. It's the scale of a building. It has a gravitas to it. I just think it's it's of the earth, formed in regular geometries. It works with vaults. It works in gantry constructions. It just has a lot to it. It can be worked. It can be felt. It has solidity, has longevity. It can be recycled. Does a lot.
I'm not asking you to choose your favourite child, but is there a favourite brick project of yours?
The favourite that's been designed would be the Rosebery Primary School, which is under construction at the moment. So that's going to be a recycled brick project, and it's of a civic scale, has a beautiful authenticity to it. It'll be one to watch.
We can't wait to see that.
Nice one. Yeah.
And you've been a part of the awards for a long time. What do they mean to you or the architectural community from your perspective?
I think annual events are really important to architecture, to actually think about what you've done and to put forward what you think is important work for the rest of the profession or others to judge and to look at. I think it's important to show what architects do with a specific material and to showcase that and to put that in a group. I think that's wonderful reflection. You're curious as an architect and you make new things to then put it out into the public and have others reflect on that and make a judgment. It's useful.
Yes, yeah. And out of curiosity, how long did it take to complete the book?
About a year. Yeah. It's a lot of effort on designers. Some of the work was rephotographed because the landscape had grown up around projects, and to just see them in that context and with that beautiful lusciousness around them. Editing work, deciding what was the better projects to be showcased in a book of this nature. Working with Richard Black and Anna Johnson, who wrote such a wonderful essay, reflecting on the work, touring the projects with them. It was very good. And then Rachel and I took the opportunity to make a series of aphorisms or notes about sort of architecture that are important to us. We both teach, and we use those aphorisms in our teaching. We thought it was a wonderful opportunity to formalise those as lessons for us in architecture that could be shared.
No, I think
that's what they are.
Yeah. And you spoke about it before when we were talking about partnering hand in hand. But what do you see as the biggest focus for architects today, what should be the focus, do you think?
I think the focus is always to find a genuine project out of the circumstances that you're dealt. So the client with all their nuances, the site with all of its particularities, the state of the economy and what you can afford and can't afford, the selection of materials through sustainability and longevity and weighing those, binding into being is the thing that needs to hold. Being aware of history, being aware of contemporary works, but then finding the project for that place, for that client at that time.
Finding is being.
Yep.
Love it. Stephen, thank you so much, and also for all the support that you've given our industry over the years. Can we just go into the rapid fire questions?
Sure, no problems.
All answers are acceptable.
Yep.
Reading the news, a newspaper or online?
Either.
Handwriting or typing?
Handwriting.
For sketching ideas and concepts, would you use a pencil, pen, or an e-pen?
I always sketch in a sketchbook, but I'm just transferring to an e-pen and enjoying that a lot.
I read that. Do you like to read books or listen to audiobooks?
An art book, an architectural book, a book
Mm.
for fiction, audible.
What's important to you, style or substance?
I don't care.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
TV shows or movies?
Movies.
Antique or brand new?
Both.
Call or text?
Don't care.
Travel back in time or into the future?
Back.
Exterior or interior?
Both at the same time.
Video games or board games?
Board.
Form or function?
They both matter.
In relation to design, complex or simple?
Simplicity comes to mind.
And Stephen, we have spoken about the book. Where can people find it?
Any good bookshop,
Right.
Including my daughter's purchased it in Perth for friends and others at Dimmick. So
At Dimmicks.
yeah.
Okay, we'll put all of those details in the show notes. Again, thank you for joining us and for all of your support of Brick over the years.
Thanks for having me in here. It was a joy. Thanks.
If you have enjoyed this podcast, please follow, rate, and review our podcast. We are always looking for new ways to think brick. If you have an idea of what you'd like to hear about, there's a link in our show notes to let us know.